You know, it's striking to me as we saw that footage of a number of men walking through the streets, openly carrying their weapons, sort of dressed up like some kind of, proto-military, paramilitary gang. Breonna Taylor's boyfriend was a lawful gun owner who was using his weapon in service of the thing that people who celebrate gun rights and the NRA say is the sacrosanct reason that we need guns, the sacrosanct reason that has to be defended to protect your home from invaders. That is precisely what this man thought he was doing in the night when people barged in his home. And Breonna Taylor is dead, and there is no recourse for him.
Because Black people don't have Second Amendment rights when they are in encounters with white people or in encounters with law enforcement. That's the reality. And that's what's so chilling and so frightening. One of the MSNBC guests said it earlier today, Mark Claxton. He said, you can't put together the castle doctrine that a man or a woman can protect their home with no-knock warrants, right?
There are protests in Louisville, Kentucky tonight and across the nation in a number of cities after one officer was charged with a minor felony in connection with the death of Breonna Taylor, not for her actual killing, rather for endangering the lives of other neighbors with the reckless gunshots that he fired. This is the scene in Louisville tonight, where the police have declared a state of emergency. Federal buildings are closed to the public. Barricades were put in place downtown. The National Guard has also been deployed in the city. The mayor has issued a curfew that starts in less than an hour at 9 p.m. Eastern. Tensions have been high throughout the day. In fact, a gang of camo-clad gunmen, civilians with weapons, were seen marching in downtown Louisville this afternoon and refused to identify themselves to a reporter. Scuffles broke out between police and protesters not long after today's announcement was made. Now, police have already started rounding up and arresting protesters, declaring some protests, even though they were nonviolent, unlawful assemblies. We're seeing protests happening across the country tonight. This is the scene in Washington, D.C. There are also protests in Chicago and New York and L.A. as Americans take to the streets to express anger and frustration over what they see as the lack of justice for Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old EMT, an aspiring nurse who was killed in March when officers executing a so-called no-knock warrant broke down her door as part of a narcotics investigation. She was in her apartment with her boyfriend, who said he believed the couple was facing a home invasion. He fired his gun once at the front door, injuring an officer. Police fired back, hitting Taylor at least 5 times and killing her. 2 of the officers involved were not charged in the announcement today. They remain on the force on administrative leave. A grand jury recommended charges for a single officer. That would be Brett Hankinson, who was fired back in June. He was not charged with murder or manslaughter, but with first-degree wanton endangerment because some of the shots he fired blindly into Breonna Taylor's apartment entered the apartment of a neighbor. That former detective faces up to 5 years in prison for each of 3 counts. Legal experts say he could potentially qualify for pretrial diversion, which would potentially keep him out of prison. The officers who shot Breonna Taylor remain free. I'm joined now by New York Times correspondent Rukmini Callimachi, who's in Louisville tonight. Rukmini, you've been reporting on this and done some amazing reporting on Breonna Taylor's life before this moment. Talk us through what happened today in terms of what evidence was presented, the charges, and what the reaction has been.
You know, Chris, the difficulty with this case is that there were a domino effect of decisions that were taken before the officers even got to her door, which in many ways set in motion the events that led to her death. The 3 officers who showed up at her door were not part of the investigation that led police there in the first place. That intelligence was already flawed. There have been questions about the warrant that was issued in the case of her apartment. But once the raid was in motion, the 3 officers who were at her door did have a warrant that had been signed the day before by a judge, so they were there legally. According to at least one witness, they did announce themselves as police. They beat down her door, and once they got inside her apartment, they were fired at. So what the Attorney General explained is that according to Kentucky's statute on self-defense, they were within their rights to fire back. Brett Hankinson, the detective that is the only one who is being charged here, broke the formation at the door, the stack of officers who were there getting ready to go in. He ran outside into the parking lot, and from the parking lot, without any line of sight, he began blindly firing into her patio door and into her window. Those bullets passed across her. They did not hit her. This is why he is not being charged with her death. But they went into an apartment behind hers where there was a pregnant woman, her husband, and their 5-year-old child. Thankfully, they were not hurt. But that's where that charge is coming from, the reckless endangerment charge for the neighbors who were behind.
We should note that Breonna Taylor's boyfriend says they did not say police, and he did not hear them. There is one witness who said they did hear that. The police say they did announce themselves. He says that it's night and people barge into his door, and he thinks he's being assaulted. There are no drugs on the premises. Nothing is found. There is no reason to think they're doing anything criminal whatsoever. He is a lawful gun owner, and he is protecting his domicile.
Right. A couple of points, Chris. So, number one, according to a former instructor at the police academy here in Kentucky, who taught the course on what is called dynamic entry, which is this type of raid when you burst into somebody's house, you have to knock and announce very loudly. You're supposed to announce so loudly, he said, that you wake up the entire neighborhood. By all accounts, that did not happen. I was able to find, after taking apart that apartment complex, I was able to find a single witness who I believe is the same witness that the Attorney General and their investigation spoke to. And he was outside his apartment. He was a truck driver who was coming home late from shift. And so he was on the landing outside and heard the police shouting police. And crucially, he heard it only once. So it's possible that both sides are telling a version of the truth here. It's possible that the police announced themselves, but not sufficiently. And it's possible that Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend did not hear them through multiple walls in the bedroom where she was asleep and he was getting ready to fall asleep. Now, regarding the investigation, the family and the legal team have pointed out that no drugs and no cash were found at the premises. The investigators that I've spoken to have pushed back really hard against that, and they point out that no search was actually conducted once she was killed. Once she was killed, the search was called off. I was skeptical of this claim until I was able to get access to hundreds of pages, now thousands of pages of police documents. And I did find among those documents a document that said warrant canceled, and it was issued before all of the protests about Breonna Taylor. So that point remains inconclusive. But you're absolutely right. If you're asleep in your home in the middle of the night, why would you hear police that shout at most police once?
Rukmini Callimachi, the New York Times, who's down there in Louisville as folks react to this announcement today. I want to bring in Sherilyn Ifill, President, Director, Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And, something that I've seen a lot of people say today is that the law as constituted gives police tremendously wide latitude to use lethal force against people. And this is the system that we have.
Well, I have talked for some time, Chris, about what I call the regime of impunity that protects police officers and the entire apparatus from accountability. And we're seeing some of that today. I insist, Chris, on reading something to you. Based on my observations and supervision of this officer for the past calendar year, I would not recommend him for reemployment at any time in the future due to his actions in violation of standing orders, refusal to accept supervision, and general poor attitude towards the Division of Policing and its commanding staff. That was written by the former supervisor of Officer Hankinson when he worked at the Lexington Police Department, written a year before he joined the Louisville Police Department. So one area of impunity is the ability of officers, unfit officers, to go from department to department. Since he's been in Louisville, he's been the subject of multiple disciplinary actions. He is currently under investigation for multiple charges or claims by women of sexual assault. This is the person that they had go to serve, quote unquote, serve this so-called warrant at Breonna Taylor's home. So it begins, first of all, with just the personnel. And then we know all of the mistakes that happened, the sending away of the ambulance that is supposed to be outside when they engage in this kind of action. I want to know more, though, Chris. This is why I want to see the grand jury transcripts. I want to know how this case was presented to the grand jury. The idea that they would come forward with only one set of charges, none of them having to do with Breonna Taylor herself, is quite alarming. And I would like to know how this case was presented to the grand jury.
It's striking to me as we saw that footage of a number of men walking through the streets, openly carrying their weapons, sort of dressed up like some kind of proto-military, paramilitary gang, that, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend was a lawful gun owner who was using his weapon in service of the thing that people who celebrate gun rights and the NRA say is the sacrosanct reason that we need guns, the sacrosanct reason that has to be defended to protect your home from invaders. That is precisely what this man thought he was doing in the night when people barged in his home. And Breonna Taylor is dead, and there is no recourse for him.
Because Black people don't have Second Amendment rights when they are in encounters with white people or in encounters with law enforcement. That's the reality. And that's what's so chilling and so frightening. One of the MSNBC guests said it earlier today, Mark Claxton. He said, you can't put together the castle doctrine that a man or a woman can protect their home with no-knock warrants, right?
Right.
So this encounter happens. And remember, the boyfriend is charged with attempted murder before all of this came to light. We are only learning about this because of the activism, the protests, the refusal of people to forget Breonna Taylor and to insist that we say her name. And after all this time, what we've gotten out of it are these charges, these wanton endangerment charges against an officer who never should have been on that police force, let alone assigned to execute a warrant under this kind of high tension situation. There's a lot more to learn about what happened and what has been happening in the Louisville Police Department.
One thing that I've learned from Radley Balco's great work in his book, Rise of the Warrior Cop, is the insane overuse of no-knock warrants. I mean, this is an extremely dangerous tactic, extremely high leverage, that is used indiscriminately by forces across the country of barging into people's houses and causing mayhem and violence and destruction and mistakes a shocking percentage of the time.
Yeah, a mistake that results in a loss of life. So one positive that has come out of this in Breonna's name is that Louisville no longer uses no-knock warrants, and they have been outlawed, which is wonderful. There is a provision that would bar no-knock warrants in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that was passed by the House and that sits in the Senate yet untended to. This has to be addressed, but this whole warrior mentality of police departments, which is why I'm sitting here nervous, Chris, because LDF filed suit against the Louisville Police Department in July because of the tactics they used against protesters in May and July, using live projectiles, excessive force, and so forth. And so we are hoping tonight that the police will exercise restraint as protesters exercise their First Amendment rights in response to today's announcement.
Sherilyn Ifill, it is always such an honor to get to talk to you, particularly at these very fraught moments. Thank you so much for carving out a little time for us.
Thank you, Chris.